Not one thing has done more damage to the Catholic Church than the internal rebellion against her teaching on the sanctity of marriage and specifically the teaching forbidding birth control. Aside from all the societal ruin contraception has brought about, the spiritual harm is far more destructive, as is evidenced by looking around at the ruins of a once robust church. Contraception, once given the green light by Protestants in 1930 at the Anglican Lambeth Conference, then spread quickly through the culture. But Catholics had managed to resist the contraceptive tidal wave until the sexual revolution. Then, strongly encouraged by dissident and heretical clergy, the Catholic population began to share the same fate as that of the general culture.
But you haven't had a stable church since the middle of the last millennium with the publication of the 95 Theses and the collapse of the Sacred Canopy. That's when the Catholic Church's monopoly throughout most of Europe died. But if you're keeping things a little more recent, I'd have to say that your church becoming synonymous with not only child rape, but the protection and trafficking of child rapists to other communities unaware of their crimes is much, much worse. But of course, no. Keep showing your lack of perception in talking about contraception instead.
50 years on, following from Blessed Pope Paul VI encyclical Humanae Vitae on human life, the Church is facing the same demographic issues that the culture is facing: an aging population, insufficient age distribution throughout the larger population, and a declining population. And on this last point, the overall birth rate in America is lower than at any point since records started being kept, and if it weren't for immigration, legal and illegal, the population would actually be in decline. The same is true of the Church. Catholics are marrying less frequently and having fewer children, and if it weren't for immigrants, legal and mostly illegal, the Catholic population would have fallen from its long-held place of roughly 25% to around 15%. And even with the immigrant influx, the drop-off is so steep that Catholics now only comprise slightly less than 22% of the population.
Okay, first of all, the population is not declining. It's still growing, yet the replacement rate is pretty stable. Now how can that be? Well, people are living longer, meaning that even though the base of the population pyramid is no longer growing, the upper age groups are starting to fill in as more and more people per generation make it to said ages. This is being demonstrated on screen. That's why the population pyramid is effectively becoming the population rectangle. And we can see this in the US population as shown here. For the most part, it looks pretty uniform until you reach the upper age groups, though there are a couple of anomalies I need to note. First, we must note that the 55 to 59 age group is slightly larger than the others. This is the tail end of the baby boomer generation, which started in the mid-40s and ended in the late 60s. We see the same happen for age ranges 20 to 34. These are the echo boomers, the inevitable result of the baby boomers as the baby boomers themselves reached sexual maturity. But beyond these two groups, the age ranges below 55 seem to be pretty stable at around 6.2% of the total population with roughly equal gender divide. Now I'd like to bring back the graph used on Church Militant when Vortex states the following.
The Church is facing the same demographic issues that the culture is facing: an aging population, insufficient age distribution throughout the larger population, and a declining population.
Now when I first heard this, I thought the graph was meant to represent the quote larger population as Vortex states. But clearly this cannot be the case. The 19 to 34 age range is portrayed as relatively non-existent in this graph, whilst on actual population pyramids, we see the echo boomers make up more than their fair share of the general population. Now there are two other alternatives I could come up with. First, that this represents the age distribution for Catholics, and second, that this graph is entirely fabricated as a fear tactic. Now I contacted Church Militant for clarification but heard nothing back from them, but I'm going to be generous and exclude the second possibility, so the possibility that Vortex and the Church Militant outright lied. I'm going to assume that this is the Catholic age distribution. Well, first of all, the claim that Catholics are seeing the same apparent demographic troubles as the rest of society is clearly false. General society has an overabundance of 20 to 34-year-olds with the echo boomers, whilst the graph used by Church Militant shows an underrepresentation of the very same generation. If Vortex had any basis for his assertions, we'd expect said generation to be as proportionally large, if not larger than the general population, but we don't. This cannot be the result of contraception unless Catholic baby boomers used far more contraception than any other demographic. Instead, we must turn to look towards other possible causes. The thing that struck me about the way these generations are drawn is the cutoff point for the first generation at 18 years of age. For many people, this is an important time in their life, with many leaving home, going to university, meeting new people from other backgrounds, and generally maturing from a teenager into a young adult. Another thing is that this generation of echo boomers has another name, one which, if you search for in relation to the topic of Catholicism, may shed some light on the dramatic decrease. Echo boomers are millennials. Now, the Catholic Church, along with all Christian churches and indeed seemingly all structured religions, are scrambling to figure out why they're losing traction with the younger generations like never before. Vortex asserts this to be the direct result of contraception, the simple claim that less Catholics are being born to replace previous generations. But as shown by comparing the age distribution of Catholics to the general population, this simply lacks all basis. What they actually face is the threat of heightened social accountability. Millennials, more than any generation before them, have become very good at not letting injustice slide. Now, this has resulted in the SJW hysteria. Cries that these attempts at upholding accountability have gone too far. Think about the protests against the Me Too movement, which drew attention to predatory practices from sexual harassment to rape that had become part of accepted culture. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church is just one big Me Too case, with its protection of child rapists to the extent of moving them from place to place, leaving behind a trail of psychological destruction. Then we have the Church's hostility towards LGBT+ individuals, their constant victim blaming, the hoarding of money donated by people of all religions and none under the idea that it would go to charitable purposes, yet instead only made it to the Vatican, and yes, the Church's maintained position against reproductive control. All of these problems and more have shown millennials just how ethically rotted the Catholic Church is. Previous generations were perfectly fine ignoring the Church's hand in slavery, in colonialism, in torture. But this generation here is saying, no, not us, we expect better. Which brings me on to the 0 to 18 demographic. These are not Catholics. These are assumed Catholics. They're the children and teenagers indoctrinated into the Catholic Church who, like millennials, will leave the church in droves the moment they mature. And all of the churches know this, which is why they love to put out propaganda pieces like God's Not Dead and A Matter of Faith, or indeed cartoons like this. They're in their death rows, and that makes them more dangerous than ever.
The numbers of Catholic priests have shrunk and continue to decline as an aging priest population grows older at a rate faster than younger priests are coming up and replacing them. There are now more priests in America over 65 than under 35, and many of them are well beyond 65. Catholic schools have essentially been wiped out, with 75% fewer students overall than in 1965, and many of those schools that have avoided closure have managed to stay open by admitting large numbers of non-Catholic students who are not taught the faith, a prime example of just keeping the machine going without any real mission.
And how does that relate to contraception? Surely, if the 75% drop in students was the result of said practices, the same drop should exist across the board with the rest of society. But it doesn't, suggesting that there must be a completely different cause, such as Catholics refusing to fund their own religious indoctrination, demanding more and more funds of the state, only to find out that doing so then puts said schools under the restrictions of the First Amendment. Now, I'd personally like to see all religious schools closed, as all education should be secular, the very nature of education being to teach students the facts of reality and the best means to examine it. Education is not meant to fill their heads with outdated mythology as you desire. But ignoring that, your argument is total shit.
The bottom line is simple arithmetic. Since the rebellion against church teaching on marriage and reproduction, which occurred at the height of the sexual revolution, the church has been on course for demographic suicide, somewhat slowly at first, but expanding at an ever-increasing speed, and now a half-century later, almost complete. Once leaders threw in the towel on defending the teaching on birth control and the sanctity of marriage, every other malformation came in the camp as well. The poor philosophy and reasoning addressing the evils of the sexual revolution has brought about a near moral collapse, and Catholics now virtually lead almost every religious group in support for abortion, homosexuality, same-sex marriage, cohabitation, divorce, and civil remarriage, and so forth. There is not one area of Catholic moral life that has not been tainted and twisted owing to the revolution in the church against the church. Families have been wiped out and shattered. Adultery has become commonplace, which has had the knock-on effect of creating an annulment crisis. Children whose parents swore before God to raise them in the faith have been shuttled about from home to home, denied the peace of mind and safety and security that every Catholic child should expect. Unschooled in the faith, these children leave the faith without ever having been taught anything substantive about it.
Oh no, they have a very good understanding of the church and its vile nature. That's kind of the problem. The road from Christianity is littered with red Bibles, a fact that shows us another way the Reformation irreparably harmed your religion. Also, the idea of Catholic children being safe is just laughable considering the way in which your church has set about protecting predators. Lastly, it's not the result of a lack of philosophical thought. It's the result of your religion's lack of ethical basis. There's never been anything remotely moral about the church.
Until this damage is undone and a solution is found as to how to combat it, the church will continue to undergo its demographic suicide here in the West. Too many clerics, including bishops, are terrified at the prospect of even mentioning the subject for fear of the massive blowback they will receive, and they will receive it. But none of that matters. They are presiding over a demographic disaster unseen in the annals of church history, and they are duty-bound to step up and fulfill their roles as successors of the apostles and preach the truth of Christ. They must clear their seminaries of any dissenters or cowards who will not defend the church's teaching. And if they are unable to do this themselves, then they should have the integrity to resign and at last relieve themselves of the moral obligation to do the right thing. Else they will have to give an account of their treachery of silence before the eternal King.
And there we have it, folks, the most ill-thought-out solution to a problem I've seen in a long time. Look, I love the fact that your religion is dying out. I really do. But I have to keep to the facts in my response, and those facts tell us that the lack of millennials inside the Catholic Church is not the direct result of contraception. It's the result of millennials investigating the moral claims of the Church and finding them to be completely wanting of an actual ethical basis. The people who have left, not were never conceived as you're trying to pretend, but have left the church because of said church's stance against contraception, won't all of a sudden come running back if said church doubles down on the stance against contraception. It truly boggles the mind as to how you think this could work. Then again, it's never like your grasp of reality was particularly strong to begin with. The whole idea of demographic suicide, however, just comes way too close to the way in which white nationalists talk about migration, a feeling not helped by the way in which you have to keep noting illegal immigrants whenever you mention immigration. It's kinda creepy. Anyway, I feel I've said enough already. This video sort of fell apart after you lost your whole notion that society as a whole was in trouble. It's really not, but I guess the truth just doesn't sell your crap like the dishonesty you've come to rely on. Hi there, I just want to say a few things here at the end of the video before you go. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, John Schoenrock, Alexander Williams, and Daniel Martinez. Your support has ensured this channel its ability to grow over the years, and for that we are truly thankful. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like this video, as well as subscribe and follow Essence of Thought on Facebook and Twitter. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, an organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Do note, any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability, both mental and physical, will be removed immediately and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's keep this space one which upholds the humanist values. Thank you for watching.